Okay, great. Yeah, let's start. Can you explain what NVC is to you and nonviolent communication and what your approach is and maybe like how it's different from like the original book that I read and you once told me to throw away and burn?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I was introduced to nonviolent communication, which is NVC, in 2002, and I loved it. There were pieces of it that felt wonky and weird. There were pieces of it that really worked. Were you gonna
Wait,
say?
2002?
Yeah,
How old were you in 2002?
20 something?
Really?
Yeah, I was home from college on Christmas break.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Um, it was a really helpful tool because I was doing like not immediately at that time, but later on as time went, I was doing a lot of work in like rape crisis advocacy and suicide prevention stuff. So like having like a framework for how do we listen deeply, how do we listen well, how do we hold space was really, really important. And there are pieces of conventional nonviolent communication that just don't work. They just don't they don't work anywhere. And so in 2017, 2016-ish, I started developing my own framework of decolonizing nonviolent communication, of like, how do we use these tools in a really effective way? And what is the weird stuff within nonviolent communication that has its roots in systemic oppression, like unacknowledged, unaddressed systemic oppression, and how do we take that out of it? Um, so for me, um, nonviolent communication, or DNVC, is really about listening to our bodies and bringing our authentic voice into the world. Because our authentic voice, our authenticity is the most nonviolent thing that we can contribute
Mhm.
to community, to care, to society. And that takes a lot of self awareness. It takes a lot of self awareness because we have bodily reactions. So, like when we're pissed, when we're hurt, when we're sad, I think the most common one is when we are sad. Lashing out is a very common response, or shutting down is a very common response because our body is doing things to protect itself, which then creates problems in relationships, right? When we get reactionary with each other, when we push each other away, that kind of thing. Um, versus when we can name, I'm sad and I really want connection, or I'm angry and I don't have capacity for connection, whatever it might be. When we find that self awareness, when we strengthen those skills, it allows us to come back to each other, I think, in better, more authentic ways. So, decolonizing nonviolent communication is about listening to the body, developing an emotional vocabulary so that we can communicate our needs, and then staying in capacity so that we can build the connections and relationships we want to build.
Awesome. There's so much in there that I feel is so present also in consent or necessary for consent to be practiced in an ongoing way, like particularly the listening to your body piece. And like I call that full body listening and not just listening to your body, but like also observing someone else's nonverbal cues and like taking that as equally important information, sometimes even possibly more important information than the words that they're saying. I mean, the best example is like when someone's like visibly upset and you say, "Are you okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And the words are just completely incongruous to like the the way that they're expressing how like their emotional state, and then you as the person in connection with them like tending to all of that.
Mm.
And even maybe also tending to the fact that they maybe aren't so aware of how they're feeling and so they're telling you they're fine, or they're actively lying because they want you to think they're fine or they don't want to ask for help. And what is that all like, incorporating that all into your approach to staying in connection or giving them space or whatever that may be.
Yeah, and I feel like just diving in, that's where the
Yeah.
nuances of consent start to get really sticky and tricky. Like,
Yeah.
particularly, I think, um, when, like, I can think of times when someone has said no, But I'm like, but do you like when I have offered to show up for someone, I've offered to fly out somewhere, I've offered to drive somewhere, like somebody's in a bad state, and I will say I can
Yeah.
come be with you. Would you like that? And they'll say no. And I'm
Hmm.
like, is that really, you know what I mean? Like that's what, and that edge. And I think for me personally, there was a time, I think also like, I'm an Enneagram 2 Cancer sun sign, so like hyper helper. And that helping identity has historically been a big part of me. And so the
Yeah, me too.
nuances,
I'm also a Cancer for
uh
the
for the
record.
listeners, yeah. So the nuances of like, when was I overrunning consent by showing up and it wasn't wanted versus when was I
Hmm.
tuning in accurately
Right.
to something that was necessary? I remember one time um, with someone that I loved very, very I just got this intuitive hit and I was like, I'm gonna cancel my meetings today and I'm gonna walk over to your place. And I walked over and they were just getting off the phone. Um, like in that moment, I did not know this, but in that moment, they had found out that someone that they loved dearly was dying, and that was
Mm,
happening. Ooh, I'm crying. Anyways,
mm,
and I just showed up outside because, um, but those are all like those are edge places because somebody else would not have liked that. You know what I mean? Somebody else would have liked
right.
the space, like, don't be up on me like that. And sometimes we don't know until we do it wrong.
Yeah. Do you want to take a sec?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. Be right back.
Yep.
Where do you want to go back in?
Oh, oh yeah, like you don't know until you do it wrong. Um, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the ways that like the idea of consent. I've been reading this book called Sexuality Beyond Consent, um, by Avgi. I can't envision her last name in my mind's eye, but I'll put it in later. Where like she talks about how the whole idea of affirmative consent is kind of like based on this false premise that you can ever fully know yourself.
Mm,
And,
mm,
I studied philosophy in college, and like so much of what I was most interested in was about um like the sort of faultiness of the process of introspection
yeah,
and perception, and how like no two people share the same exact reality.
yeah,
And like what does that mean for us in relationship, and what does that mean for like our sense of justice and so on.
yeah.
And I think a lot about the concept of risk and like growth and challenging yourself and exploring your curiosity, and there's so many aspects of the most basic kind of consent education that sort of that suggest, implicitly or explicitly, that like unless you are 100% sure about something, don't do it.
Uh-huh.
And that doesn't account for, something that I'm curious about but maybe makes me nervous, or a challenge I'd like to take on, or a risk that I'd like to take, and maybe a risk I'd like to take with you. And there's like, relationships are risky, sex is risky, like a lot of these things in our lives are risky. We can't see the future. We can't fully know how I'm going to feel, or how I'm going to respond, or what I'm going to want, or not want. And so part of what we do in relationships is agree to the risk.
Mm,
So, showing up for a friend, right? When they say no, like they, I mean, that's not exactly the same kind of agreement that I'm talking about, but there is a sort of, um, there's maybe an agreement that I'm making internally of like, I'm taking a risk here that might upset my friend,
mm,
but like, I am using as much information as I possibly can about them, about where they're at, about who they are, and I'm gonna I'm gonna take that risk. They get mad at me. I'm prepared to handle that.
Mhm.
But it's in line with my integrity right now to like show up for my friend. And even if I'm just standing there, I'm
Mhm.
outside if you need me. Um, yeah. So I'm just thinking about, NVC too, and like what you're talking about like listening to your body and your intuition. Um, and how, yeah, sometimes that's like interestingly and in with so much complexity, like ignoring the words that someone is saying to you.
Yeah, and I was thinking about as you were speaking also, there's the nuanced edges. I'm saying nuanced a lot, but like the edges of like being able to be clear of, am I taking action? We're always take everything we do is an action to meet our own needs, right? Like if I'm showing up, but the question is, am I showing up um because I have a need to be wanted or I have a need to be helpful? Or am I showing up from a place of real, true interdependence where I
Hmm.
can sense your need for care and I'm being present for that? But they're two different things. And
Yes.
I think that it's a really beautiful thing when we're able to tap into the latter and when we're able, but if we don't have the self-awareness to even track, and I think the other thing is that during moments of like heightened emotion, during moments of crisis, during moments of emergency, unless we're practicing that self awareness beforehand, like even kind of like what you're talking about, like, because I think that a lot of the work that you do around even just having conversations around like consent isn't always enthusiastic. Sometimes it's a thing that I'm
Hmm.
just gonna try. I'm gonna try and but if we don't talk about that beforehand, if we aren't even aware that that is an option, then we get to a place where we're making a choice because the choice has to be made, right? Because we're being
Hmm.
pushed to make a choice. We feel like whatever it is, we're making a choice, and then it feels like we're sort of like almost like splattered up against the ramifications and are trying to make meaning, when the shit is on the fan and we don't know what's true. And I think that both with kind of like consent education, DNVC, understanding your needs, the more work you do ahead of time, I don't think we can actually ever prevent conflict or a clusterfuck or whatever from happening. But I think that as we build muscles for awareness beforehand, it can sometimes create sort of guardrails for when we're climbing up out of the mess, that we have like a few different kind of things to hold on to pull us up.
Right. Right. Yeah. That idea of the guardrails is really interesting. And also like, yeah, what you're sort of describing is like the prep work. I'm thinking of like intimacy coordination. Like that's your
Mhm.
prep, and then like on the day of shooting, if you've done your prep, it goes really smoothly. And
Yeah.
if and when mistakes happen, you have those guardrails to catch you. You also said something though that was making me think about um you were talking about uh yeah, the prep work and the guardrails and oh man, I don't remember.
Mm.
Sometimes I was talking to a colleague the other day about um how some of these, like, I like the language of guardrails, become like we're not always so equipped with enough guardrails. So like sometimes the guardrails are, vocabulary, right? And if the only vocabulary that we're providing is um in very black and white terms, very binary terms, and um one of the guardrails is the language of like consent violation,
Mm.
then that term has to it gets stretched to like encompass way more than it actually can,
Yeah.
and then everything becomes a consent violation if it doesn't feel good,
Yeah.
right? And then as a result, you're like collapsing such a wide range of like human error or miscommunication or confusion into this very binary concept of like, I either consented or I didn't,
Mm.
or, it was either consensual or it wasn't. And I'm not even talking about like in sexual context. I think I'm really just talking about like, something happens between us that one of us doesn't like. And I now feel like the only language I have in order to bring to you, like, hey, I didn't love how this happened, is that you violated my consent,
Mm.
which I don't think, like, I mean, thinking about it in terms of NVC, I don't think that that is a non-violent way to engage in moving through conflict, because all you can do, like, it's a conversation ender. All you can do if I say you violated my consent is like try to figure out where you went wrong, apologize to me, or like explain yourself or defend yourself. Whereas, like, if we have these larger guardrails, I think some of these guardrails are like the language of risk. Like, we took a risk together. I don't love how it went. Let's talk about it.
Mm.
I feel like that's such a more, that keeps us connected, and it keeps us um like let's figure this out together.
My internet is cutting in and out. I feel like I am
Oh.
getting a lot of the gist. Okay. Okay, so two things. One, the piece where you said something about like when people sort of are like, you violated my consent. Something you said something along the lines of that you don't feel like that's a very nonviolent way to like approach the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Framework speaking, I don't use that language. I don't ever label anybody else's behavior as violent or nonviolent. I trust other people to show up the way they want to show up. And then it's my job to show up in authenticity in response to that. Because, and I think we have talked a little bit about this even in terms of how our own work has shaped. Um, I think about the times when when you're just getting introduced to consent and when we're just getting introduced to healthy communication, there's often this experience of like 5 million light bulbs going off of like, oh my gosh, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize that I had a choice and I wasn't given a choice and somebody, you know what I mean? It's like we're suddenly registering all the moments in our lives where we weren't given enough options or where choice wasn't made available to us, and it can bring up this kind of like volcano of grief or volcano of frustration, all of these really really big emotions. And then we get into finger pointing land. We get into, my parents didn't tell me how to do it, society didn't tell me how to do it, you didn't tell, this was what I should have been given, and this, you know what I mean? And I think that, frankly, truthfully speaking, for both of us, a lot of our work started there was like an amount of like, we have to change this because the way that this was given to us wasn't right and it wasn't working. Um, and I think that we've also changed in how we hold the work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Partially because we're at different places, we've had different life experiences. And I know that for me, and I like a place, well, for me, um, the things that I care about the most are moments when I sort of cross my own boundaries of consent. Um, because self-responsibility has become, it's become like an access point of like, I cannot control everything around me, but I can control this. I can be responsible for this. I'm gonna pause because I feel like I'm losing my thread, and I feel like also you're
Mm.
seeing threads you want to pick up on, so I'm just gonna pause there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I think, my work was very much born out of like 2017, Me Too blew up, articles about Harvey Weinstein came out, Matt Lauer, so on and so forth. And I remember thinking, like, then like Louis C.K., and I had been such a huge fan of Louis C.K.'s comedy and his work, um, that I was like particularly gutted by that
Mm.
instant. And I also remember thinking, even then in 2017, I was thinking ahead of like, how are these people, how are these men, you know, uh, gonna re-enter society? Like, how do we facilitate that? Who's gonna do that? What does that look like? What would it look like for someone to apologize and for people to, the majority of people to be like, that is sufficient and you can, come back. Um, I started writing a play about it that I never finished. And I think I see like those seeds in my work today, but I think where a huge shift has taken place is in this piece around like um there was an impulse to do this work, and not just for me but like so many people at the time. The impulse to do the work was to change how men behave, right? To change how perpetrators behave. And I'm not saying that those are always the same group. um, but then I think I got to a point where, pretty quickly it was very clear, like I find it very, it's kind of like the opposite of autonomy and liberation for me to feel like my safety is contingent on anyone else changing their behavior. So even from a really early stage, I was like focusing on, how do you get to know yourself and how do you get to know your limits and your boundaries and your needs and your desires, and then how do you communicate that authentically. So it was always about this like looking inward. Um, but I still do see, and I have to even kind of stop myself frequently from, um, putting my ideas out there in such a way that they get interpreted as like, this is how everyone should be acting, like about other people. I think it's so much more for me, and I'm hearing this from you too, about like, I can control, I can only control what's in me and like what I let out, how I choose to express myself. Um, and that work is like a lifelong excavation
Mm.
project.
Excavation feels like the word.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny that you say that because as soon as I said it, I was like, well, I really feel like it's more of like, it's like a simultaneous excavation and creation. Like
Mm,
I'm both
mhm,
actively choosing, like, well, this is who I want to be, but also that's who I've always been.
mm.
And how do I like co-create myself alongside like my, fate, destiny, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm. I don't particularly have a thread I want to pick up on from there. It feels really, and even this is like these moments of like shared experience or presumed shared experience, like for me that moment just now felt like a really resonant sweet spot, and it just kind of felt good to sit in it. It also felt good to sit in it watching you outside with like this like really
Hmm.
lovely sunlight and greenery around you. Um and I think about moments where consent is present in those moments. There are so many moments that I love. One of the things that I love in so many of my like most intimate relationships are the moments where we actually don't have to say anything, where we,
Hmm.
you know, vibes, whatever, whatever, but we're picking up on the vibe. I often say that, the less I have to explain, the more there is to talk about.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm just thinking about that in the context of the work we both do, because there are also times I've thought about times in communication and conversation where it doesn't matter what the words are. We just cannot find our way to each other because something energetically is off. Um, and I think the same can be, there's speaking of the binary of like, I will do this or I won't do that are sort of like the clean places to be when we're not able to be fluid with each other, like when we're not able to be like when rupture causes too much impact. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like in those moments, it is safer to just say we are only going to talk on these days or from this time to this time, whatever it is, that container is necessary. But how much pleasure can be experienced when we're able to be in a fluid state.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and a word coming up for me in that is like trust. Like navigating messy territory requires a lot of trust.
Hmm.
Um, and there's like not, I don't want to do that with everybody, you
Hmm.
know? And so there's instances of conflict where I'm like, I'm choosing to not address something that is
Hmm.
maybe bothering me. And instead, I'm choosing to take space. And then there's like other relationships where, and I don't mean indefinitely, I just mean like I'm kind of activated and I'm going to just be like, okay, that's, so and so, that's just how they're dealing. And like, that's okay. I just like need, some time away or whatever and then come back. Whereas like there's other people in my life where there's more trust, where I feel like, yeah, let's try to navigate this conflict, even if it means
Yeah.
that we're getting activated and even if it means we're like getting heated with each other, you
Yeah.
know? And I I originally wanted to talk to you about a little bit about friendship breakups. Because I'm curious how like our work intersects in that arena. I
Mm,
think so much about how like consent is such a beautiful tool for connection and like building long lasting relationships and getting through conflict, and how sad it makes me when it instead gets used to be like, well, consent was breached, therefore like we can't be in each other's lives anymore.
mm,
um or ways to sort of bypass like setting boundaries or having difficult conversations,
mm.
which are important to having long lasting relationships. And I've lost relationships where that wasn't something that the other person was willing to do,
Mm.
too uncomfortable, too challenging, or I have to imagine they maybe didn't feel the trust.
Yeah. Didn't feel the trust, or it wasn't worth the time in that moment.
Right.
Um, or there wasn't capacity. I think when you use the word trust, I think about the word capacity, of how
Hmm.
much we're all holding, which then shapes how much can I pour in this direction or not. Um, and I think that for me, friendships are gold. Friendships are like they feel like a thread of gold
Mm.
that is like
Hmm.
part of this weave, this stitch that is actually like kind of like the primary bond. Um, like beyond blood family, beyond romantic relationships or whatever, friendship feels like this really incredible, important bond. And I remember when I started really understanding that friendships can go away and that they can break. Which as a Cancer was incredibly like weird. I was like, what do you do? Why?
Yeah, what? But we could
Why?
be friends forever. We could just be
Uh-huh.
friends forever. Why would we not?
Yeah. And since then, I have met people who are more along the lines of like, like some friendships are for a season or like,
Yes.
and I would even say for me, I think because some of the things I'm a little bit more, I have one buddy who describes herself as like a skittish cat when it comes to like friendship and intimacy. And I like really remember that. And there's ways I think that I am skittish now. I'm like slow to call somebody my friend because I'm like, what does that really mean? How long are we really going to be with, you know what I mean? That kind of, all that stuff. Um, and, and I don't, again, because I don't know that. I don't know that hard conversations always guarantee a strengthened outcome.
Totally.
So I don't know that I can say anymore that like it is important to have hard conversations. I don't know what is important these days when it comes to that. I think what is true is I think that it is important to have the skill to have hard conversations. I think that that is something that I can firmly say. I think it is important to have different skills, and then you can decide which relationship merits this or not. But I think that if you don't know how to have a hard conversation or don't know how to sit with discomfort, um, then there's like a big loss waiting to happen because then we just don't know what could have been.
Well, and again and again and again,
Yeah.
like not just that one time. I mean, I had to have a difficult, like a friend breakup that was really heartbreaking for me. And I, I had this whole, um, like part of my belief system and, this stuff around communication and consent and uh, that was very much tied to my values. And, I had made commitments to myself because of ways that friendships had ended in the past where I was like left wondering what the fuck happened. And so I had made the promise to myself that like I would commit if I wanted other people to have difficult conversations with me and be willing to do that, then I also needed to be willing to do that with other people
Mm.
and navigate conflict and try to move through it and so on and so forth. And then I ended up in this situation where like I was talking to my therapist about just feeling like I don't think I can be in this friendship anymore. Like I don't I
Mm.
feel so controlled.
Mm.
It feels so controlling to me. It was like I I just and when I thought about like what I could bring to the table with this friend of like this is what I need, it was it there was no way to divorce what I needed from like asking them to change
Yeah.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I need you to change in all these ways in order for us to stay friends, I think we're just not compatible.
Hmm.
Like I don't want to ask you to change.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that. And you're going to reach whatever conclusions about your own behavior in your own time. And every time I would run through the conflict conversation in my head, I was like, yeah, I don't see how this because I would need you to change. I just would need you to,
Hmm.
and that's not, if you need me to change and I need you to change, like then we probably shouldn't be friends.
Hmm.
And yet I requested a conversation. You know, I was ready and willing to do that. I had loved this person for years.
Hmm.
Um and that conversation was dodged and avoided. And I had also like been privy to so many conversations that they had had with other people in their lives that were going to be similar,
Hmm.
that I knew I had a lot of evidence that this was
Hmm.
not going to go well and
Right.
ultimately just be a situation where they were going to tell me that I was wrong in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And so I talked to my therapist about it and I was like, I just feel like it's not really in line with my values to like step away from this friendship without having the conversation. And she was like, well, you have many values.
Mm.
And, one of those values is like your own safety and security.
Mm.
And it's sounding pretty clear that going into that conversation, you don't really feel like it's a safe thing for you to do. So
Mm.
I don't see it as like out of line with your values.
Mm.
Um, and I think sometimes values are in conflict. Like you can't prioritize two certain ones at the same time. You can prioritize some at the same time, but sometimes they're in conflict. Like sometimes prioritizing my authenticity reduces my impact.
Mm,
even though both authenticity and impact are my values. Or increasing my impact means that I have to sacrifice some authenticity in this moment.
mhm,
Um, I'm thinking about like people who are not open about the fact that they're sex workers, let's say, like educators. Um, anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but I'm looking at this instance in which like my own commitments to myself around relationships and friendships and connection and conflict, um, like had to, uh, like I had to shift
mm,
to incorporate the nuances of this
mhm.
particular dynamic, which is hard to stomach, like I felt like a hypocrite.
Hmm. I never do. I mean, not that I never do, but like I have a different way of thinking about authenticity, I think, because um, I I think about like what is the most effective thing to do. And I think the most important, I think one of the things that I strive for and also try and teach is how do I maintain my authenticity and really, how do I maintain my sense of dignity while I'm communicating in a way that the other person can hear me, right? Because, like,
Yes.
how do I do that? Because the point of conversation, the point of anything is to be effective. And, another thing that I like tell people, is it important for you to hear yourself or is it important for the other person to hear you? What is more important to you? And if it's important for
Mm,
the other person to hear you, then we have to put our words in a way that they can hear us. And so then the question is, what are the words they need to hear, and how do I communicate that in a way that keeps me with my dignity and my sense of authenticity? I recently had a conversation with somebody, a very, very painful conversation. But thankfully, I like sometimes when I'm talking, something I realize about myself is that when I'm talking to people who I know that they don't respect me, they don't value
hmm
what I have to say, it's a lot easier for me because I don't go in expect I'm like, this person does not know how to respect me. I'm not going to ask them to respect me. That's not the reason I'm here, right? I'm here because there's a particular conversation, there's a particular end goal, there's some functional thing, you know, that I want to move towards, and I need this person's participation. Um, which then frees me up because then I hold my own sense of dignity internally and I'm really just listening for what do I need to say? How do I need to move in order to effectively navigate this conversation with this person? And I think that the relationships where we rely on the other person, we all have a need to be seen. We have a need to be valued. We have a need to be heard. The relationships where we rely on the other person to bring that to the table, where I like really want to be seen by you, I really want you to meet that need for me. I think in
hmm
those moments, yes, it can be incredibly tricky because we are whether we register it or not, we're like navigating like, I really want you to hold this, but you don't know how to hold this, but I don't know how to hold this when I'm with you because I'm used to you being able to hold it because it feels
hmm
good. It feels good to be seen by you. And something has changed and you don't know how to see me anymore. And then all these emotions come up. And then I think it becomes in it is harder for me to have when I'm having conversations with people where I don't need them to respect me or see me, I'm able to walk in with like a sense of dignity that allows me to stay in my authenticity, but also strategic authenticity. Like strategically, what do I need to say or do to move the needle? Versus in conversations with people where I'm accustomed to being more vulnerable. I'm accustomed to not having to think so much, right? I'm
hmm
accustomed to that quality of fluidity, right? But if that fluidity isn't there, I need to shapeshift. And I think what might be true is that in that relationship, shapeshifting feels inauthentic, because I'm
hmm
not accustomed to shapeshifting with you. But like I know that I know how to shapeshift and maintain my authenticity, but I don't do that in every relationship. But it doesn't make me feel like I'm less authentic in the places where I'm shapeshifting.
Yeah, I really really resonate with that, and that's something that comes up a lot in my classes is like the concept of masking, whether it's like
Mhm.
autistic masking or various other kinds of masking. I think people bring up code switching as like a
Mm.
kind of masking too. And I often ask a similar question, which is like, how, like, if, because communication can take a lot of energy and time, like, if I don't want to have this conversation again, and perhaps again and again, I do have to incorporate into how I'm communicating what I know about how you will best hear me.
Mm.
And are there ways that I can do that while I still feel authentic and I still feel like I'm showing up as myself, but I'm also accounting for the fact that we're in relationship and I have to meet, there's like, we're going to have to find the space between us and
Mm.
like meet there. So, I can't simply say something the way that I want to say it, the way that feels most authentic to me. I I care about you and I also care about not having to have this conversation forever.
Mm.
So I'm going to try to do it in a way that, you know, includes how I like to communicate and how you need me to communicate with you.
Mm.
Like that does feel authentic and that does feel in line with my values.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Well, I feel like we could probably be talking for a long
Yeah, probably.
time if we
Yeah.
wanted to. But this feels like a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, you too. I'll
Mm.
stop recording.